everyone. This is going to be a short teaching specifically for those of you in the small groups, but of course it's valuable to any of you that watch this. But for those of you in the small groups, this is really going to apply to the second part of what we're going to get into after all the stories are shared. And so you're going to really want to apply and take some of this into the second part. But before I jump into it, I really want to give a little bit of background and a little bit of my heart as to why I'm doing this. Why are we doing it this way? And even before I get into that, I'll say this: the heart of the whole training, I really just don't even like the word training, but we're going to use that word for the sake of other words. The heart of all of this is to bring you into the face of God, to bring you into truth, who is God. Okay. Especially for those of you walking through cognitive dissonance, this is going to be such a gift to you. It's essential to know how to really come into his face and know that it's him. I am going to be doing a teaching on discerning his voice too. That'll kind of go along with this, but knowing that, again, for those of who are walking through cognitive dissonance, to be able to recognize truth and be able to be focused on truth and let truth lead you and guide you out of cognitive dissonance is so valuable. I have walked many people through this process. And I've actually really loved it because I do it without, actually, I shouldn't say all the time. Most of the time I'm intentional about not telling people what the truth is, but actually helping them to come into his face so that he can really hear from him. Because here's what I've found when it comes to trauma, abuse, specifically narcissistic abuse, because we know the cognitive dissonance with that can be so intense that you really, someone can, I mean, what you're doing is you're battling what is truth at the end of the day when it comes to cognitive dissonance. What is truth? And I can stand in front of you and tell you what truth is, but it's not enough. It's not enough to rewire your brain back to believing just what I'm saying. Even if it bears witness with you, you need something more. And what I've seen that is the most effective is when people actually really hear from God themselves, and they, and usually it's not once, it usually is a number of times where people have to really get it from him, and then they're able to actually walk out of, specifically in that I'm talking about narcissistic situations, narcissistic abuse, but really even in trauma, when you have cognitive dissonance, you're still battling between what's the truth, what's not true. And this, again, being able to connect with the one who is truth and allow him to lead you out is just, I mean, I've seen it. It's just beautiful, absolutely beautiful, the way that I have seen him do that for people. Okay, I'm going to keep talking about that, but it's just absolutely beautiful. And so when it came to all of this, I was like, oh my gosh, I have to do this. I feel like God has been really like setting that up actually for a while. But honestly, for me, it really did start. I'm not going to get a lot into my background. I'm sure many of you have read my book, but for those of you that haven't, I came out of a lot of trauma. My whole life was trauma after trauma after trauma. But alongside of that, I I was a gifted child, so I knew things, I saw things. The spirit realm was really real to me, more real to me than the natural world was. And so naturally, as I got older, I gravitated towards spiritual things, which led me into the New Age, where I worked as a clairvoyant. A psychic is a type of psychic. A clairvoyance basically means clear seeing. So I worked as a seer psychic. And so I'm not going to get into the whole story, but coming out of that, and many years go by, and I come into a situation, and I had, eased my way into prophesying again. It was a really long process. But actually, when I got to IHOP, in 2004, end of 2004, I moved to Kansas City. And after a little bit of time there, I ended up, well, actually right away, I ended up in the prophetic department. But then after a little bit of time, I started leading and eventually teaching a team, and then developing the whole evening section of the prophecy team. So then I started a whole training arm for the prophetic department, and then oversaw several teams. Anyway, when I started to get deeper into that, and was creating content for that, I really, well, my heart was that what I had learned and what I had heard about the prophetic up until that point wasn't satisfying to me. What I mean is that, working as a psychic, I would sit in front of people and I would tell them what I saw and what I heard. Of course, there's a lot more to it, but basically that was what I did. And coming into, for example, like, and in the prophecy rooms, in Kansas City, we have prophecy rooms. People would come in and I would tell them what I see and what I heard. And so creating content, I was so disturbed because I was like, what's the difference between what I did then and what I'm doing now? Like, what is this thing about? What is prophecy about? And that was what instigated all of this. It's what, for me, again, it started how I would teach people in the prophetic. So it was the foundation, and it has been since then, which is like what, almost 20 years ago. This is the foundation that I start from. But it started to, the Holy Spirit started to show me how to apply it in other ways. Like I would teach it to business people, which I worked with primarily for a long time. And then I eventually, I had always drawn people to me that had encountered abuse or trauma. And I naturally would bring them through this process. It wasn't like a conscious thought where I went, okay, I have to show them how to do this. It was just naturally what I would do because it's such a part of my life. I mean, like what I'm going to teach you guys is my everyday, every minute life. That is a life of face-to-face communion with God. And of course, it's a journey, it's a process to go deeper and deeper into these things. But again, I started to find with people with cognitive dissonance, when I would do this with them, but essentially, cognitive dissonance is where you're battling over I'm oversimplifying it, but what's true and what's not true. And so to be able to come into a place where you are able to connect with truth and let truth lead you out was everything. And so again, I really want to bring all of you guys into this. Those of you that are struggling with cognitive dissonance, or those of you that are just moving through trauma or abuse, this is going to just be such a great starting place for you. I just have seen so many breakthroughs with this. Okay. Anyway, moving forward, jumping into this, let me just start with this truth. Okay. God is love. Just soak that in for a minute. God is love. The uncreated God, the one before Jesus, the Father. The Bible tells us he is light. John 1, he is light. Light came into the world in the face of Jesus. He is light. He is love. So the one without form, the uncreated God, the Father, is light and he is love. I really think about that. I think sometimes we just think when we hear God is light, we think of, oh, it's truth coming into our lives and shining the light in something, or, and yes, that's true. However, it's very literal. And I love science. I love the study of all those things, and I'm not going to get deep into it, but essentially just to say, no, God literally is light. He is love. He doesn't just give love. He is love. I want to just say it over and over again and say it slowly because I want it to really sink in, because if this truth will completely transform your life. As slight as it might sound, it is vastly different than, not realizing that God is love. God just gives love. He gives his love. If he just gives his love, then it's something that's given and taken away, right? If it can be given, it can be taken away. And God never takes away. Now, there are situations where we're separated. I'm not going to get into all that, but it is impossible for God to remove. We can be separated. People deny him. People walk away from him. But it's impossible for him to change who he is, okay? He is love. He does not just give love. He is the uncreated God. And he came down, I'm not going to spend a lot of time in this, but it's a passion. God, the uncreated God, came down, took on flesh. And in the face of Jesus, we see who he is. We see love. And love, God, encompasses many different attributes, right? Love looks like many different things. God and love, I use interchangeably, okay? God has many different attributes. Love has many different attributes. For example, you've got compassion is an attribute of love. You've got mercy as an attribute of love, kindness, goodness, long-suffering, the fruits of this spirit, right? These are all attributes of love. Even when we're talking about the fruit of this spirit, we're actually talking about, you could say, who God is. It's the nature of love. So when you think about who your God is, who he is, I feel like sometimes we focus so much on what God does, what he did, and what he does, that we actually really miss the who. What is he really like? And that's important when it comes to relationship. When you think about natural relationships and you're in a relationship with someone, it's supposed to be, intimate connection. All relationships should have some form of connection. But when you're talking about really intimate relationships, there needs to be connection. Can you imagine what would connection look like if with that other person, you just focused on what they did? What they did for you, what they did for their work, right? That's superficial. It's not a place where you can really connect and have communion. We fall in love first with the who someone is, whether we realize it or not. It starts with the who of someone is. I have to share this story because it's just one I always fall back on, and it's just hilarious. I think of my son-in-law, and my daughter, they met at a Bible college, a Bible school, sorry. And they had gotten there early. And so a bunch of them had connected early before the school started, and they met up to play volleyball. And my daughter was on one team and my son-in-law was on the other team. And you have to know my daughter, she is like a ball of love, but the girl is like fire. She is just 500 times me in terms of fire. So she's on one side, he's on the other, and he's like, let's go. And she's like, I'm going to kick your ass. I mean, and he says in that moment, he fell in love with her. And I'll think about that. Why? He saw something about her. He saw that fire. He saw that competitive thing that she has in her, that, fire at the end of the day. And he went, oh, I love that. He saw an aspect. It doesn't mean that he knew all of her, right? I'm talking about God. Doesn't mean he knew all of her, but he saw an aspect of her nature that he loved. And that was what the spark was. It started something in his heart. And it's the same way with us with God. Most of you, unless you just came, into a family where religion is part of your culture and it wasn't relationship, most of you came to Jesus because something happened in your heart that got your attention. And whether you recognize it or not, there was something about him. Whether you experienced his love for you one day, that he's merciful, that he's, whatever it is, there's something that sparked your heart. And just like in natural relationships, like if my son-in-law, they're married now, but for the rest of their marriage, if all he did was see that one aspect of her, that she's just fire, their relationship would be really limited, right? Communion and intimacy is a process of discovery. And it's the same way with God. It's a constant unfolding of who he is. And so if you're not in that place where you're first connected, and I'm not talking about in your head, I'm not talking about a head knowledge that God is kind. Okay, we all can say God is kind, but do you actually know it? Do you experience it? Do you feel it? That is where you really know it. Just because we hear the sound of something or we're taught something does not mean we know it. Okay, I'll say that again. Just because we hear the sound of something, we're taught something does not mean we know it. The evidence of knowing something is the fruit. Does the fruit of your life reflect that you know the kindness of God? And I'll tell you how your life would reflect you knowing the kindness of God. You would move in kindness. That's how we know. I can look at you and see what aspects of God you really, really know based on your nature and how you are. It's like mercy, for example. Don't tell me you know the mercy of God if you yourself don't move in mercy. Because knowing him, there's an automatic transformation that happens in us when we really know beyond here, where we know in our knower who he is. There's transformation that happens on the inside of us, right? As we behold him, and I'll put the scriptures down with this teaching, but as we behold him, we become like him, and we're changed into his image from glory to glory. So we say it again. As we behold him, as we see him, as we know him, we see him, we become like him, and we're changed into his image from glory to glory. And of course, if I say that I know the mercy of God and I reflect some of that in my life by being merciful, that doesn't mean that I know the fullness or the depth of his mercy, right? There's always more. There's always deeper and deeper that we can get into. And so it all starts with that initial spark, knowing him. So when I talk about knowing him in any context, this is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about here. I'm talking about know, intimately know, which I'll tell you, I mean, it's essential. I'm going to go take a bunny trail just for a minute. It's essential for so many reasons. I mean, it's his greatest passion for us, but I'll get into that. But it's just so necessary for everything in life. And even beyond that, when you think of Matthew 7:21, right? Jesus says to those coming before him, he says, "Depart from me. I never knew you." And that word, to know, translated, is as a man knows a woman. So he's talking in a very intimate way. I did not know you. And they said to him, "We prophesied in your name. We healed the sick in your name. We cast out demons in your name." And he says, "Depart from me. I never knew you." These are ones who were doing the works, you guys. They were healing the sick in his name, prophesying in his name. And he says, "Depart from me. I haven't known you." And so that knowing is so important. So going back to the healing component of this, and that God is love, and that it's only through love that we're healed. Only through love. Even when someone lays hands on someone for healing, deliverance, whatever it is, be sure that it is the power of love that is actually doing the work. God is love. God heals, right? And so only love has the power to transform and change. It is the only thing powerful enough to do that and sustain it. We can receive things by faith. Now, hear this, because I even did this in the New Age. As a practicing witch, I could obtain things by faith. Okay, I was talking with somebody about this the other day. I was saying, yeah, I mean, if I could see something in my mind's eye and believe it, and then were, obviously some other things I did, I could receive it. So I could obtain things by believing, by faith. However, it doesn't have the substance to sustain what you're believing for. Only love has the sustaining power, okay, for anything. And so again, when it comes to healing, what I want to bring you guys into with this is seeing him, knowing him. And as you see him, there is something that's going to happen in you. You're going to be transformed into coming out, coming through. I'll share this one testimony with one person that is coming to mind right now, that I did this with. She had actually went through some of my courses, some of my teaching on this, but then I was also personally walking with her through some things. And I brought her into this process of discovering how the Holy Spirit was revealing Jesus to her. Okay. And we're going to actually do that in the small groups. I'm not going to tell you what aspect of his nature that he's showing you. The Holy Spirit is going to give it to you. And there's a beautiful way that he taught me how to do that I'm going to teach you guys how to do that. It is amazing when you experience it. I have done this all over the world, you guys, and it continues to amaze me when I have people come up and give testimonies. What they see is exactly what they need. It's amazing. Anyway, so I have brought her through this, and she discovered that God was showing himself to her as the one at rest. And so what she did every day was she would take a walk, and there's a way you do this, which I'm going to show you guys, to see him, to look at him as the one called rest. And every day she did this. And she began to hear his voice, what he was saying to her through cognitive dissonance. And she got like a little piece of it, which was really difficult for her. Like, she got it at first, and it was like, oh, that's hard. But she continued in looking at him. She didn't try to do anything. She didn't try to respond, or all she did was look at him. And the more she did that, the more she was assured of the truth, because she heard his voice. I didn't tell her. She got it from him. I knew it previously, but again, it's me telling her, me telling anyone, you telling anyone is not enough. When it comes to narcissistic abuse, trauma, any kind of abuse, you telling someone is not enough. It's not enough to move them forward. And if it is, it's not enough to keep them. And I'm sure many of you have experienced that yourself and with other people. And so I knew better. I knew that my words wouldn't get very far. But because I knew what God was doing, I partnered with him to walk with her, to encourage her, to strengthen her. And with what I knew he was doing, but also just in her relationship with him. And so I watched as she completely came clear about what she had to do, what she was supposed to do. She did it. And continuing to look at him strengthened her. It was just such a beautiful thing. And I have seen this for her. She saw the God at rest. Woo! That's a powerful one. But for everyone right now in your life, the Holy Spirit is showing you something right now about who he is that you need, that it's specific for you, to lead you out, to bring you forward, wherever you're at. If you're not in cognitive dissonance, it's fine. It doesn't matter. If it's just trauma that you're needing healing from, it's him that's going to do it. And so I know you guys, even in the small groups, when I showed up, I think it was the second group, and I said, listen, we're not going to actually talk a lot about healing modalities and that kind of stuff. We're actually just going to do the thing. We're going to come to the one who is healing. He doesn't just give healing. Think about that. He does not just give healing, he is healing. He doesn't just give freedom, right? Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. Why? He doesn't just give freedom. He gives himself. He is freedom. Think about that. He is. So when you come into him, you get what you need versus trying to get something from him. There's a huge difference. I have so many testimonies about this kind of stuff. When you realize you don't have to try to get something from him, that it's him himself, there is a rest. There is a rest, and it becomes very relational, and you connect in love with him versus trying to get something from him. And so I know for many of you, even, you're tired. Many of you probably have been through so many different healing modalities and have seen very little fruit, if any. And I know so many of those things are really, really good. And they do help people. I've been helped by some of those healing modalities, and I've seen other people. So you just want to go with however he's leading you, at that time with what you need. And so with this, it really is just bringing you into who he is. It's into encountering him and seeing him. And so we're going to do that through the word. And through the word, the Holy Spirit's going to show you how he is revealing himself to you. And then what we're going to do is actually walk you through what that looks like, how to interact with him, how to keep your gaze on him, because it's all about the eyes. It's all about seeing. And so even like as a psychic, I taught people how to see. For me now, I teach people how to see, but I teach people how to see him versus seeing things. There's just a little thing on the prophetic here. I mean, one thing that I really learned is the difference when I wasn't doing it in him and with him, I was seeing things. Anyone can see things. It's not hard. As a psychic, I saw things. As a practicing witch, I saw things. Revelation is not hard. I mean, there are people who create the most beautiful things, that are seeing something. You think of Steve Jobs, look at what he created. He created something out of what he saw. He had a revelation and saw something, and look what it produced. However, it's not necessarily building the kingdom. So my point is that anyone can see. But now what I've learned, especially when it comes to the prophetic or really anything else, I don't want to see anything outside of him. What I mean is I look at him, we look at him, and we look at what's in him. We look at him and what is in him. I don't want anything outside of him. I want what's in him. And everything we need is him. It's in him, and it is him. And so, and I will say this, his greatest passion, you were created from love. Think about this. Love created you. God is love, the uncreated God. You came from him. You were made in his image before you were ever in flesh. You came from him, right? Ephesians 1 says this, before the foundation of the earth, we were in him. You came from love. You are love. Your original essence, before you were ever separated from God, in him, you were love. And so his primary passion for you is to come back into that place, to know him, to know love. That's his passion for you, to know him. He so wants you to know him. Think about this. He so passionately desires for you to know him and be with him where he is, that he took on flesh. God, the uncreated God, took on flesh, humbled himself, Philippians 2, right? Humbled himself, took on flesh, came in the form of a man. The uncreated God came in the face of Jesus and showed us who he is. Everything Jesus did, everything Jesus said, his birth, his life, his death, was all declaring the Father. It was all declaring who the Father is. And Jesus said this in John 17. He says, Father, I did what you sent me to do. I declared your name. Listen to that. Jesus said, I did what you sent me to do, Father. Why did the Father send Jesus? To reveal him, to declare his name. So Jesus declared the name of the Father. Again, life, birth, death. The death of Jesus is my favorite. so declares who God is in the most profound way. Because when we see the cross, we're actually seeing love himself, right? Romans 5:8 says, God, essentially, I'm rewording this, but God demonstrated, it says God demonstrated love. God demonstrated who he is by laying on a cross. Think about that. God took on flesh in bodily form and laid on a cross so that you would know who he is. And greater love has no one than this, than to lay down his life for his friends. So when you look at the cross, what do you see? I have literally been to the cross. I talk about this in my book. For me, I went on this, the Holy Spirit took me on this journey. It was a literal encounter. I found myself in the garden with Jesus. I was with him walking the road to the cross, and I saw him hanging on the cross. And I tell you, I have never felt or encountered that love ever in my life. It changed my life, because I remember saying, oh my gosh, if I could just contain a pinch of this, just a pinch of this love, it would be all I ever needed, because it was coming at me in waves and waves, and I'm crying and I'm weeping because I saw who God is. I saw who he really is. He's love. And the mercy, oh my gosh, another attribute of love, an attribute of God, is mercy. I realized that everything was created by mercy. And so, like, for me now, mercy is so easy for me. I don't even have to think about it. It is a very natural thing for me, because I had such a profound encounter with mercy. And I always say, when people tell me they've seen Jesus, if I don't see mercy reflected in their life, I question if they've actually really seen him, or if they don't love. I'm like, because I know when I saw him, that love is so, it will transform you. He is love. He is love. So for me, that's always like the indicator, one of the indicators for me when people tell me they saw him. I'm like, what are you saying? You saw him, but what are you saying? And I don't want to judge people, but I'm telling you, there's no way you saw him and weren't impacted by love. It's impossible, because it's who he is. And so my point was that he so desires us to know him that he came first in the face of just one of the ways. I'm not going to get into all the ways. This one of the ways he showed us who he is in the face of Jesus, in his birth, his life, his death. He did it in the Old Testament too. Okay, one of them. One of them. I'll just take 5 minutes on this one. Think of okay, I'm gonna go through this story really quick. Moses and the Israelites, right? We're in Egypt, and we know God speaks to Moses, lead my people out, right? It all happens. They're going out, right? And listen, God did this. You have to keep this in mind with this story. God did this. God led them out. I mean, how many times did God tell Moses to go to Pharaoh? And Romans 8 says this, God himself hardened Pharaoh's heart. Have you ever thought about that? It's like, God, you told Moses to go to Pharaoh and say, let my people go. But then you yourself harden Pharaoh's heart. And if you want to get into this, read Romans 8. It's powerful what Romans 8, really Romans 8, 9, 10, about all of this. Because Paul in Romans 8, he's talking about mercy, actually. But anyway, God himself hardens Pharaoh's heart. Finally, they go out, right? He lets them go, and they come to a sea, right? God led them to a sea. And I say this to people all the time. God is still doing this in your life. He will lead you to the sea, right? Where there's enemies behind you and there's a sea in front of you and you feel stuck. There's nowhere to go. And how did they respond, right? They were angry, they were frustrated, right? They missed the whole point of what God was doing. What he did in hardening Pharaoh's heart, and what he did all the way through the whole journey of Israel through the wilderness into the promised land. You'll see the same theme over and over and over again. It was God revealing who he is. So they come to the sea, and they needed God to show up, right? I mean, it was an impossible situation. And again, remember, God led them to the sea. He knew what he was doing. It wasn't like God didn't know there was a sea there, right? Like, come out and then, oops, I didn't realize there was a sea there. No, God knew there was a sea. And what happens in that moment? Why did God do that? Because when they came to the sea, what had to happen? God split open this sea for them. So we understand that God wanted to do something amazing in their midst. God did a miracle in their midst. He led them to a place where they needed a miracle. Why? It's not just so God can say, look how powerful I am, although yes, that's part of it. Why would God do that? He wanted them to see who he is. And not just them, us, because we have that testimony. So he was saying to Israel, look, I'm the one who delivers you. I'm the one who delivers you. It's me. How would they know God was a deliverer if there wasn't a need for deliverance? Think about that. How would you know? How would you know God is mercy if there wasn't a need for mercy? Again, Romans 8, 9, 10, go read it. How would we know? You wouldn't know. We wouldn't know who God is apart from these things in our life that are challenges or difficulties. And so you see this all through the journey of Israel. I'm the one who delivers you. I'm the one who feeds you. He brings them to a place where they have no food. God did it. He brings them to a place where he heals them, where he gives them water, on and on and on and on again. And I do this in my longer trainings. I actually take, when I do internships, I actually take people through that whole journey where they go through the whole thing and they look at how God was revealing himself. I encourage you to do that if you want to really get into this. And so my point is that from the beginning of time, that has been his passion. Think about this. Jesus was the lamb slain before the foundation of the earth. You ever wonder about that? He was the lamb slain. Now, there's so many things to that, but there was one thing I want to point out. He was the lamb slain before the foundation of the earth. Before there was a need, I'm going to leave you, I'm going to move on from this topic and leave you with this thought. Before there was ever a need for a cross, there was a cross. Think about that. Before the foundation of the earth, he was the lamb slain. Before the foundation of the earth, before there was a need, before Adam and Eve did their deed, there was already a lamb slain. And so ponder that. But in keeping this in mind, it was his desire to be known. And maybe I can talk about it in some of the groups and we can get into it, but I don't want to make this video super, super long. But the whole premise is to say that his passion for you in your life right now is for you to know him. And everything that you did, no matter where you're at right now, healing, trauma, abuse, I mean, no matter what it is, the answer's in him. And so my heart for you guys in this is to bring you again into a place of recognizing who he is, knowing him, seeing him. How do I remain in that place? How do I go strong in that place? Seeing him, hearing his voice. How is he leading me into healing right now? And so this is what we're going to get into in the second part of the small groups. And so I wanted you guys to have a little bit of context of this before we got into actually doing it. And you can go on my YouTube channel, Michelle Seidler, and there are more videos on beholding. If you look, I think there's a playlist that says beholding, and there's actually a really awesome, Joel has done, my son-in-law, a few videos when he got married to Casey and came into the ministry and started doing some of these things and experiencing them, totally, radically changed him. And he's done some of those videos talking about it and some testimonies. He's really applied this in his life, and it's been amazing to watch. So I asked him to share some, testimonies about that. So bless you guys. I look forward to diving into this with you. And for those of you who are not in a small group right now, we will have more. And I would love to bring you into this. So just keep your eyes open for when we do the next one. All right. Bless you guys.